theoretical is not what it's called. It's called predictive modeling, just for the information. Utilization of after effect data from the July implosion does help, but what the air dispersion modeling allows you to do is to better understand what could happen. Now, if you remember the comments that were made on stack number 9 and stack number 8, stack number 9 is steel lined, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Right. However, stack number 8 is concrete, partial, brick lined internals. So what that means as it falls, depending on how it breaks up and falls, it will collapse on itself. So it would be similar to a what you would call a shape charge. So you would have a similar pattern of discharge from what comes out of it. So as it collapses and falls on itself, it could shoot dust and particulates out of the endpoints. So this is one of the things that the modeling will be looking at. What would be the potential if it does fall all the way down and the brick collapses on itself? So these are the things that the air dispersion modeling allows you to do. Now, I understand that you guys are utilizing the contours to block the blast. So are you also looking at potentially the areas outside of the boundaries on sampling of soils prior to that or not, to see if there's a change in soil composition before and after?
Oh, yeah, that's part of our phase 2 work so that we can sell the properties. So you're talking about an entirely different thing.
No, I'm talking about outside the property, because if you're number 8 will collapse on itself, and there's a potential for discharge that's going to go outside of the property. And that's one of the things that the model will be looking at as well. When I spoke with Verdantis, that's part of the analysis that they're looking at. So based on the results, will you be looking at sampling outside of the boundaries to see the potential impact or not?
It depends on the magnitude of deposition that occurs outside the boundaries. We don't want our discharge of any of our material going off the property. If it does go off the property, we will address it. And that's what I described earlier to the group.
Mr. Deegan, you're not answering my question.
Well, you're interrupting me before I can finish answering.
You're not answering it because
okay.
It's not a...
I need a chance to answer, Mr. Shamir.
Please go ahead.
If you can please just let him finish his answer before we continue to question him.
I described that we have response contractors on board and ready to mobilize and will be mobilized, so that if there is an incident where certain resident or a Ford car dealer or something has a deposition from our implosion, we will get that material off their property.
Okay. If I may ask now the question, are you baselining the sediment, the soil, the dust outside of your property or not? That's a very simple question.
We haven't had any release of dust off of our property. So no, I'm not baselining. Why would I baseline the background conditions in Avon Lake?
Mr. Deacon, it's a very simple thing. He's not answering my question.
Mr. Shamir, could you let him finish his answer though, and then you can follow up?
Please allow him to.
If I have some reason to believe we've made a discharge of dust or some material off the property, yes, we're going to sample and we're going to fix the situation, but we haven't had that to occur yet.
So let me ask the question again. You're going to look at the model results. So those results may show that there will be movement of particulate, especially out of number 8, because of how it collapses. You know, a shaped charge has a different projectile dispersion than a non-shaped charge. So what comes out of number 8 may be going outside. So if your model shows that there is a potential for that dust to go offside of your property boundary, will you be sampling before the implosion? That's a very simple question.
The answer is simply no, because your dispersion model hasn't been done yet. So we're hypothetically talking about a model that hasn't been presented to us yet. Secondly, you're asking me if I'm going to sample someone's private property before we have the dispersion model. which is a theoretical model as far as I'm concerned. Predictive and theoretical mean the same thing to me.
Have you ever utilized modeling in any of your work, Mr. Deegan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is the norm in the industry, whether you like it or not, whatever you want to call it. This is the norm. Now, you want to call it theoretical. The issue is, if is the question. It's not that you will go and do the work now. It's an if. If there is an indication that there is dust that's going to migrate off-site, will you look at the potential of sampling prior? Because you're not going to be able to know if there's an impact after effect.
I answered that, and until we see the dispersion model,
Okay.
I don't have another answer for
Thank you.
You.
I do have a question.
Jen.
Mr. Deegan, thank you for being here. I'll turn my sound on. Okay, thank you for being here. So from the last implosion that we experienced, off-site, we do have some baselines. I think the shopping center did like a geotech to make structural information to make sure that there wasn't any kind of a change there. We know that the Peter Miller House, which is a very old house that's just west of you, did not have any changes there. And that information will be compared after this next implosion to see if there's a change, because that can be part of your baseline. I believe what Mr. Shamir is asking is if there can be a soil sampling done prior to the implosion and compare it to after the implosion to see if there's been any, and forgive my non-technical terms, but any renegades that have merged there. Am I describing it correctly, Mr. Shamir?
Yes, so it's the baseline before the implosion so that it can be compared to
After.
after.
Okay. I think that's what he's asking. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr.
That's
Chair.
not
Any
within our plans, but thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Deegan. At this point, I'll open it up for public input. Anybody from the public have any comments or questions? Okay. With that, I move to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. We're going to start the CCM in just a moment. Welcome to CCM on November the 18th. And we are in council chamber, and tonight we're going to have a work session, Fifth Third Investment Review. And I'm going to actually turn this over to our finance chair, Mr. Zuber.
Thank you, Madam President.
To introduce it.
Probably about once a year, we have Fifth Third come in. They handle our investment portfolio, just to go over what they see and give us hopefully some future ideas on where the market's going to be and give us some more feedback. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Groza, and I think he'll probably introduce the rest of his team, and we're looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Casey. As always, it's our pleasure to come visit you and do an annual review. Wanted to personally thank Mark as well as Val for arranging this meeting this evening. My name is John Groza. I'm a Vice President with Fifth Third Bank's Investment Group. With me this evening is Denise Coyne, Vice President and Senior Portfolio Manager, as well as Marianne Michael, who's also Vice President and Senior Administrative Manager. So it's actually our anniversary. As of this past September, we've been working with the city of Avon Lake for 26 years in managing your assets. So we're really proud of that, and wanted to thank you again for the continued confidence in our services. So we'd rather give you too much information than not enough. So we have a booklet for everyone this evening. We want to be mindful of your schedule this evening. So Denise was prepared to reflect on not only the portfolio, but give you our forward market outlook as well. As we've done in the past as well, feel free to interrupt at any time, ask questions as we're going through the investment management presentation. So I'll turn it over to Denise.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. Thought I'd start off with just a little bit of an overview where we've been, and then our thought going forward on what Fifth Third sees in the markets going forward. So turn to page 2, kind of overall our economic outlook. And I'm not gonna, as John said, touch on every single number here. There's a lot of numbers here. But we wanted to provide you with charts and some numbers for you to take a look at after if you're interested. And what you see here is that the economy has really been doing absolutely quite well. I think when we came into this year, 2024, if you turned on the TV, a lot of people were looking for a recession. We have not been in a recession. We are growing at around 2.8% or close to 3% in the economy, so no recession here. Consumer spending, which is the biggest driver of economic growth, has been very good. Jobs have been pretty strong. Unemployment is low. We're looking at unemployment somewhere close to a 50-year low. So, you know, the domestic economy remains very strong, and we're forecasting for next year and consensus for next year for the economy to continue to grow. If you turn to page 3, you'll see we support it here with this chart, which basically just shows you the unemployment rate in the economy. And you can see where we are down there around the 4.1%. Really came down since COVID. And, you know, there's been a little bit weakness in the job markets, but we've had a tremendous amount of government support, and we've had a tremendous amount of private support. And so right now, jobs are still doing quite well. You turn to page 4, you'll see that the consumer, which drives the economy, you know, it's been a little bit weaker in here, but it's pockets of strength, pockets of weakness. But when you see household debt burdens have come way down, you know, the consumer's in pretty good shape. We paying down debt. There's modest levels here, so less vulnerable to any type of interest rate rise. So again, when you look at the economic, what we're in the economy, and you look at the consumer, and you look at inflation, and you look at interest rates, we think 2024 is going to end a pretty strong note, and 2025 is going to continue to grow also. Turn to page 5, we'll take a look at the equity markets. We do not hold any stocks in your portfolio, so I'm just going to make one comment here, put the chart in here. We can only hold fixed income instruments, government securities, but this is you might want to take this back with you. You know, the global equity markets have been very strong, and the U.S. really is the standout here. And if you look at the chart at the top, across the board, you've seen gains in equities. You've seen them for years, multiple years, but we've really seen an acceleration, and that really, too, is a reflection that the economy continues to grow. And on page 6, you know, the S&P 500 or the market, U.S. companies, earnings continue to rise, expectations continue to rise. So we're expecting that corporate earnings will continue to grow nicely into 2025. You know, you've got the solid labor market, you have receding inflation, and you have the easing policy that we're seeing from the Federal Reserve, which I'll go into a little bit more later. So really a nice backdrop here. And the next page on 7 is the bond market or the fixed income market. And this is what really pertains to your portfolio, because I mentioned earlier, you know, you are 100% invested in the bond market or the fixed income market and Treasury, government securities. It's been a tough year going back for a couple years for fixed income and for interest rates. As you know, a couple years ago, the Fed was on a raising rate spree. They raised rates probably the quickest you've seen in probably 50 years or so. And they started to switch this year, and they're now cutting. So, you know, there's actually a global easing going on. It's not just the Federal Reserve that is cutting rates, but across the globe, central banks are now starting to cut interest rates after raising them for multiple years. So we've got a coordinated easing cycle going on, and the Federal Reserve, I think, is going to continue that. And that bodes well for the returns for the fixed income portfolio going forward. As rates come down, the value of your bond portfolio goes up. It's just a mathematical number. So you'll see, again, as we expect rates to continue to come down, we expect the value of the portfolio to continue to rise over the years. If you turn to page 8, you'll see, as I mentioned, that the Fed is going to continue to cut. And the reason we think they're going to continue is because, well, here they started. You could see back in 2024, where you see the green line plateauing here. This is the federal funds target rate, or the Fed rate, their rate. And then you see that little dip. So they're in early innings, we believe, of an easing cycle. The federal funds rate is about 4.5 to 4.75, and they've cut this year twice. They cut 50 basis points, or 0.50% in October, and then they cut again 0.25% or 25 basis points in November. And the expectation is that they'll cut again in December, probably the same, probably 0.25 or 25 basis points. So we think they're going to continue on their easing cycle. The one risk to this in how fast they go, we don't think there's a risk that they're going to stop, but it's how fast they go is on page 9, and that is core inflation. Inflation peaked, as you can see on this chart. This really shows the inflation going back to 2000 and through 2024. When you look at the green line, you could go back to, you know, around 2020, 2022. It spiked after COVID, and that was pretty much really due to government spending, spending all across the board. People were spending. It just was a lot of spending going on after everybody was, you know, confined in their homes for a while. So once COVID kind of settled down and people got out, it really spiked up the inflation rate. You saw that dramatic drop coming down, and we think that is giving the Fed definitely some ammunition to continue cutting rates back. They're looking for their target there, which is 2%. We're a little bit above that, but I don't think being above that is going to stop the Fed from lowering rates. And when you take a look at 10, there you go, page 10, 2% to the far right is their target. On a 3-month basis, we're at 2.06. Year-over-year basis, we're still a little high at 2.68. But the trend is down, and so we think the Fed is going to continue to cut rates. So overall, what we see is a fairly strong economy. Now there's some weakness in some months. Unemployment is still pretty low. Inflation has come down quite a bit, close to the Fed's target, And the Fed has started on an easing cycle, which we think they will continue the end of this year and into next year. So that bodes well for both fixed income markets and equity markets going forward. So that's kind of just a snapshot of where we are on the economic end. If you turn to page 11, we'll take a look at the portfolio. $16,093,438 is the market value. You can see at the bottom where we say total holdings. Estimated annual income, $423,061. That's the estimated annual income is the income that's coming from the bonds within the portfolio. And as I mentioned, we can hold government bonds, treasury bonds, or government substitute bonds only in the portfolio. We have about 34 bonds right now, and the majority of those bonds are in treasuries. And the reason just being the treasury rates have been pretty good over the past year or 2 years. We made a recommendation at Fifth Third. The cash account is a money market. We don't have much cash. We're fully invested. And with the Fed cutting rates, that money market account is going to go down and continue to come down across the board. No matter what money market you're in, you react pretty closely to what the Fed does. So at Fifth Third, we've been recommending moving from some cash into fixed income bonds to take advantage of some of these higher rates, because we do think if the Fed continues to cut, these higher rates then will come down and you won't see these rates we have. So we're fully invested. We've done what we're recommending within the portfolio. You turn to page 12. This is a busy page, but it's just a snapshot of what your bonds look like. If you go to the top part where it says income government bonds, 100%, what that means is that 100% of the investments, the bonds in your portfolio, are individual bonds. So we're not in a bond fund. So we have the portfolio in the back of this report for you to see, but we have individual bonds that we've gone out, no bond funds. So if rates were to move up next year, just say everybody's wrong, the Fed all of a sudden comes out, inflation spikes, and they don't raise rates anymore, the bond portfolio will fluctuate, but you won't lose money because we have a maturity on every single bond. And we just wait till it matures, and then you get your money back and the interest back. So it's a very conservative way of managing the bonds. And so you really don't have to worry about the fluctuations in between. Really what it impacts the portfolio is the market value at any point in time, and it also impacts the reinvestment of the bonds. So when the bonds mature, then we have to reinvest it, what rate we get there. You can also see at the bottom, very high quality, since they're government bonds, they're Moody's, AAA, S&P, AA, and the duration or the average maturity is what I look at is about 2.6 years. So not real long, not real short, but we've extended a little bit more since rates have gone up because we want to lock in those rates again if they come down from the Fed. Page 13 is the performance of the portfolio, and you can see on the bottom, 1 month rates have backed up. They went up a little bit, and we had an election, and there was quite a bit of uncertainty, and I think there's still uncertainty what's going to go forward. But when you look year to date, the portfolio is up about 3%, and when you look on the 1 year, it's up about 5.9%. So again, if rates continue to come down, the value of this portfolio will do well in a falling rate environment. And so we don't have to worry about interest rates from the market value of the portfolio losing any principal. It's just going to fluctuate with there. So again, a very, very conservative portfolio. That's what we can do with this portfolio. And had a good year for rates. It's, with rates coming down, and the portfolio did well in that environment. And we pretty much moved out of the cash position, which I think makes a lot of sense because I do think the market values or the percentages in the cash will continue to decline as the Fed continues to cut rates. So that's overall. The next couple pages of the portfolio are just of the handout is just the bond portfolio. And again, you're going to see from what we can own within your portfolio, that it's primarily in Treasury. I think there are a few issues in there that are in other government bonds.
I have one question. On page 12, do you foresee us going out any further in duration than the 5 years at this point in time, or anytime soon, or no?
Right, well, we can go 1 to 5, so we're not gonna be all 5.
Right.
So,
the max we can do is 5 years?
yeah,
Okay. all
yes,
right,
that's the
Okay.
max.
So
So it's more, it's not real short in that we're a year or two, but we can't go out long either in the
Okay.
portfolio.
Okay.
Stay
That's the
with
only
it.
question I had, was the duration, bond duration, that's all.
Are there other questions from our colleagues?
So as you can see, Denise's role as a portfolio manager is to design the portfolio commensurate with your investment policy statement and then monitor those investments. So, the message, as she indicated, is high quality, well-diversified portfolio and pursuant to the legal terms.
Yeah. Now, we don't have cash flows going in and out. So to the answer to your question is, when something matures and we need to reinvest it, would we go out a little further or would we be a little shorter? And we would go out a little bit further just to lock in these rates, because we do believe, even though right now there was a lot of uncertainty with the election, that the Fed is going to continue to at least cut going into next year. It's really just dependent on how quickly they cut and how much they cut at every meeting. So we would extend it a little bit more if something matured.
And she's not trading the bonds. We hold those to maturity, so you're going to get your money back, coupled with the interest that flows to the portfolio.
Right.
Thank you. Any further questions? Anyone has?
So, and lastly, Mary Ann Michael, as the administrative manager, works closely with Ed. If you want to say a few words, and just if you need money, she makes sure that the money's transferred from this account to the savings account or the checking account.
Sure, yeah, we have, obviously, we have a list of authorized signers that we can take direction from, so, if there's ever a request, we check and double check to make sure that that request is coming from an authorized signer, and, raise the funds if we need to, and make the distribution. I know I'm working with Mark on getting some things updated, getting access to Fifth Third Direct, and so, get that all set up as well.
Yeah, very compliant, so.
Yes.
Mayor, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. I appreciate you coming as
Oh,
always.
absolutely, yeah. We value our relationship and appreciate your confidence.
Well, this is
Good steward of our money.
And it's very important that you are here, not only to explain to us, but to have it in a public meeting that's televised for the residents to see that we are in a secure position, because it's their money, right? At the end of the day, it's the income tax, the property tax, and we are investing it for the city of Avon Lake. And that helps our bond rating, being a good bond rating, a solid bond rating. Any further discussions to my right? If not, we're going to go out to the audience and see if there's any comments from the audience.
Okay,
And if you folks will take a seat, we're going to have our residents come forward.
okay.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Gerald W. Phillips, 461 Windward Way, certified public accountant. I look at the portfolio and there was one comment that they only go 5 years, but I look at Fannie Mae, the first item looks like it's 15 years, and the Federal Home Loan Bank looks like it's 10 years, and the sixth item, the Treasury note, looks like it's a 7-year term. So maybe they can explain that difference later. Also, I look at the 32 or 34 investments, they're all 5-year term. When they take the investment, they go 5 years. And that has a bearing, because what you're doing is you're playing the market. And if you look at unrealized gain or losses, you'll see that we have a grand total of $382,000, $367.17 unrealized loss. And that's because when they took those investments out, they gambled on the market, and they took them out when the rates were low, and they took them out for a 5-year term. And at the end of, I believe, 2023, we had 3 or 4 banks that went under because they invested long-term in treasuries, where the treasuries were, a 0.5%, and then the interest rates went up to 4%. So I question, why do they automatically go 5 years? They're supposed to know the market. They're supposed to keep on contact with interest rates. We know as we sit here today that interest rates are going to go down. So if anything, we should try to lock into 5-year terms to get the maximum. Also, if you look at one of the investments, 2, 4, 6, the 7th one on page 1, it's a treasury note which initially issued on 28/2021, matures on 28/26. We're projecting interest estimated annual income of $2,500. That's a 0.53% of rate of return. My calculations, if we cash that in and reinvest it, we have at least 2 years, potentially almost 2 years, at the current market rate. And I believe that the extra income, will exceed that loss. So I don't see that type of analysis, because when you look at the unrealized gain or losses, that's basically what you're losing over the long term in interest rates depending upon the maturity. That's just if we sold it today at today's market. So those are some comments I have from my perspective as a CPA. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Would you like to
Denise, go ahead.
respond?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, to start, if you turn on page 14, well, first of all, we are not buying just 5-year bonds. We are buying 1 to 5, and you can see that on page 12, where we show a maturity schedule in there. 59% of them are less than 3 years. 41% are less than 5 years, 3 to 5 years. So they're what we call in our jargon laddered. There are some that are 1, some that are 2, some that are 3, some that are this month. So they're not all 5. The average, the box way to the left, duration, I'm going to go to yield to maturity because it's easier to understand, is 2.6 years. When you go right above that number, yield to maturity, you say average yield to maturity. The maturity in years is 2.6 years. Right above that, the first individual fixed income statistics, average yield to maturity, 4.37%. So what that means is that if we do nothing and we hold these bonds, which we always reinvest, but if we did nothing and these bonds all matured, the worst yield to maturity we get would be 4.37. So that's a start. Going back to the individual bonds, if we start on page 14, bonds are issued. There's a limited number that are issued at a certain time. And you can buy them on issuance, which means you buy them at par, you buy them at $100 worth, or you can buy them in the open market, just like you'd buy an Apple stock, any time of the day. With bonds, there's a limited availability, so you can't just go out and buy a certain bond every day. It has to be available, so it's not exactly like Apple. But my point is that it does fluctuate, and it does trade on what we call a secondary market after they issue it. The bonds that we're looking at on page 14, the first one, Fannie Mae, it was issued on 1/10 of 20. It matures on 1/7 of 25. So there's 2 numbers to all of these bonds when you're looking at this chart. The first one is when they were issued. The second one is when they mature. So they're not all, they may be 5-year bonds, the treasuries the way they're going, but it doesn't mean we bought them, they had 5 years left. It may mean that the bond was issued in 2020, matures in 25, and we bought it in 24 and it only has 1 year. So when you look at it, that's how we are. what we're looking at here on unrealized gains and losses, as I mentioned, you can buy a bond when it's issued. That's called you're buying it at par, $100. Or you can buy it at a premium, which means you buy it at more than that $100. Or you can buy it at a discount, which means you buy it less than that $100. Now, why would anyone buy a premium bond? Well, because it's indicative of the interest rate environment and what's out there. And usually you're being compensated. What you really want to look at is your maturity. How long are you going in the bonds? We're not going out further than 5 years. And what is your yield to maturity? So what are you getting? Remember that 4.37 number I showed you, aggregate before? We don't list every single bond here what the yield to maturity is, but we have the aggregate, which is 4.37. And that's what we're managing to. We want to get that yield to maturity, but we want to be in that time frame. So if you take a look, a good bond to show you what we're doing, a premium bond, it's not that we're actually losing money on these, because you would have negative returns if we were losing money. And you don't have negative returns this year or last year. You don't have negative returns, you have positive returns. But sometimes we do have to buy a bond at a premium. Sometimes we buy it at a discount. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth treasury down, the 1031.18, you'll see we bought it at a discount. So bought it at 387, we're getting 394. But within that is an interest rate that we're looking at. This is all baked into it. We do buy things we have bought things at a premium, and then they move towards what we bought them at. They move towards a cost. So it looks like it's a negative, but it's really, you're not really losing money. It's maturing, the time is maturing, the premium is coming down to that $100 cost, but your rate of interest that you got was higher, and so that's built into the price of the bond. I know it's sometimes hard to understand with bonds, but if we were actually losing all this money, your returns would actually be negative, and they're not, they're positive. 5.9% net of fees over the 1 year.
And we're gonna hold that bond till it matures.
Right.
Anyway, so there isn't a negative.
There isn't
If
a
you
negative.
said we need the money, we have to sell that bond at a lot, then you would realize it, but it's unrealized.
Yeah. It's the same thing, it's kind of looking at, again, the Apple, because everybody knows Apple. So you bought it at $100, you haven't sold it, it's gone to 105, then it goes back down to 95. It's gonna move, the bonds are gonna move. And they're also gonna move towards the cost of what we bought them at. But we're holding them to maturity, so you're getting all your principal back plus your interest.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? From the residents here? Anybody else would like to speak? Seeing no one else come, oh,
I just got one question.
Sure.
On the 34 bonds or notes, I don't see what the actual face rate is on the treasuries or on the notes. I see, the amounts, but it doesn't tell me what the face rate is, so.
The units, 500,000. You'll see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a $400,000 treasury note, for the fifth item, doesn't tell me what the face rate is. I mean, how much is that note paying? If you hold it to maturity, what's the rate? You have a face rate and you have a market rate. Obviously, the difference between the face rate and the market rate tells you whether it's selling at a premium or at a discount. So I don't know what the 400,000 treasury note that's going to mature October 31st, 2025, what's the face rate is?
3%.
3%? Yeah, but see, if I look at that chart, I don't see 3%.
It's in the body and where it says U.S. Treasury NT 1031.
Oh, over on the side where it says between the date and the beginning date and the ending date is the rates?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Very good. Thank you. I thought there'd be a column, that's all.
thank you very much. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we're going to close the work session at this point. We're going to go into our collective committee meeting, and the first item is Building and Utilities Committee with Ms. Gentry. Thank you so much for coming, Fifth Third.
So the first two are related. So we have for the NOPEC gas program, so we are requesting an opt-in option for the natural gas program that would enable somebody who has opted out of the program to be able to opt in without having to wait till the enrollment period, which would be, the enrollment period is every 2 years. So if you opted out right in the beginning and then decided that you wanted to opt back in, currently you would not be able to until the 2 years enrollment period. So the first ordinance that we're reviewing would be for to get the approval to do the opt-in program, and then the second one is to update the plan of operation and governance to enable the opt-in program.
Thank you. And again, this is for the natural gas program alone.
Correct.
Correct. Any questions for our colleague? Yes, sir, Mr. Shamir.
Just want to get clarification. So if you have permanently opted out of the program, based on this ordinance, you will not be brought back in by NOPEC into the program. Is that correct?
This is just allowing opt-ins. It's not impacting. Now, I know that there seems to have been some issues, can't talk to those about permanently opting out. That seems to be a NOPEC issue.
Any other questions? Okay, and then do you want to go into what the difference is between the first two? One is the program and one is the
The plan of operation, yeah.
Okay, does everybody understand? Okay, the next one?
The next one is a request of the mayor to, for a letter of intent to participate in NOPEC's Sustainability Technical Assistance Resources Program, their pilot program. And I believe this is a motion, is that correct?
That's correct. This would be a motion authorizing the mayor to sign the letter of intent. And do you want to describe what that's for? So the assessment?
Yeah, so NOPEC has a program that will, that with this letter of intent to participate, will allow NOPEC to come in and do some analysis on on our buildings, our fleet, to try and find areas where the city can save money based on sustainability projects that they would recommend.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Gentry? Seeing none, then we will go on to the Finance Committee. Mr. Zuber.
Thank you, Madam President. The only item we have on is the 2025 budget. We did have a meeting on Saturday, a 4-hour budget meeting going through some of the issues that we have, especially within the capital budget. And we're looking to have this on, the budget on for first reading next week. I don't think it'll be the budget that we finally pass because there are some changes that we're going to have to make. We do have a budget meeting set for the 3rd at 5 o'clock, the 3rd of December at 5 o'clock here. We're going to ask that the engineer and the Public Works Director come and talk to us. And Mayor, I know that we had talked about trying to get, based on the numbers that we had on Saturday, a new capital budget that shows what we had talked about that day, and possibly if we can get how much money we think is going to be carried over from the last, from 2024. So then we can start looking at what exactly we want to cut out of that capital budget.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, yes, we are going to do that. I've already spoken with John. We're going to take that capital budget, most of which is engineering and public works. Council, gave us ideas of what they wanted to see in that. We'll break all that down into those items. We'll also then provide another list of items that, as we move forward, if our revenues increase next year, that we will entertain. Make sure everybody is comfortable with that as well. I do have some items that I owe council, and one of those is going to be, I'm going to provide you all with updated departmental budgets, so you have all the new ones, so you can get rid of all the old, make sure you got the right ones, and there's other information that you've requested that we're working on as well. Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I really appreciate your update and bringing us back together after the purchase orders for 2024 are closed, so we know if there's going to be any carryovers for the next year. And the finance director can give us a better sense of the revenues, of how we are ending the year in 2024 and what the projection will be. I also appreciate, Mr. Mayor, the priority list as the market changes. Any further discussion from colleagues? Okay, we will move on then to the Human Resources Committee. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to make sure to bring this forward for council to take a quick look at again in case they had any questions. We did change and take the foreman out of the supervisor, or actually Mr. Liskovic did, and with his discussions with several persons in the union particularly. And I don't know if anybody had any questions as to what exactly we took out, and we're gonna look at this as a second reading next Monday. So I don't
Any
know-
questions for Mr. Smith from colleagues?
Or any questions for Mr. Liskovic?
Mr. Liskovic? Any questions? Anything you want to say?
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Zuber?
Just the one comment that I made, we had a long budget meeting where we're talking about what we're gonna be cutting and the revenue issue. And if you look at the Public Works Department, between the supervisor that wants to be added, the engineer, and the urban forester, those are all 3 new jobs, each of them about $100,000. So when we think about the budget and moving forward, we talk about the cuts that we have to make in the capital budget, just be aware of that. Those 3, and those are new positions that we haven't had before, each one about $100,000.
Thank you, Mr. Zuber. Any further comments from my colleagues? Mr. Smith, are you finished? Anything else?
I'm finished, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. From Public Service Committee, we have 2 items. One, a fee schedule modification. Presently, the boat launch is actually in the codified ordinance section. It has to do with worms, has to do with a fee for ice, and the thought is to remove that particular item from the codified ordinances, that as the price of worms goes up and down and ice, we can adjust that internally. Mr. Likovic, is there anything that you want to add to that discussion?
No, I mean, other than, you've covered it really well. And they're just incidental fees, and there's fluctuations, and instead of coming back every year when we want to adjust them, just to be able to manage accordingly.
Thank you. So we're going to be removing it from the fee schedule. Any other further discussion from my colleagues? All right, we'll move on to the next one, the 2025 Ohio EPA grant opportunities. Aaron Thatch, who is the director of our recreation programming, would like to utilize this particular grant for the surface materials that are recycled tires. That's a poured surface that is similar to what we have up at the old firehouse, and he would like to utilize the Ohio EPA grant opportunities. So this will be a motion allowing the city to apply for that particular grant opportunity, and it needs to be finalized next week so that we can be in time for the early December deadline. Any discussion on that item? Seeing none, we're going to go on to second readings. We have second readings. We have ordinance number 24-156 by title only. Mrs. Rossman, will you just read through it?
Sure. An ordinance adopting a job description for the position of Assistant Public Works Director and establishing the qualifications and duties for said position.
Any comments from my colleagues? Yes, sir.
Just that I don't think that the clerk needs to read these.
The rest of council, what are your thoughts? Do you want her to read through each one? Council, I need to hear from you. Mr.
I don't think we've done this in the past. I don't know that we need to change it.
Okay. Mr. Shamir, you agree? Amy, you agree? Mr. Cos, you agree?
Maybe just read ordinance number 24-1,
We will do that.
just
Okay,
that
very
bolded
good.
number.
We'll do that then. I just thought it would help for the public. Ordinance number 24-157R. Any comments? Yes, sir.
If I may, just one comment. We discussed the requirement of the person coming in to understand project planning and utilization of MS Project or similar software, which has not been added to this.
Mr. Smith, Mr. Leskovic, do you want to respond to Mr. Shamir?
Yeah.
I'll pass that on to Mr. Liskovic.
Sure. No, I do have, I was working on the revisions to that draft today.
Okay.
So just didn't have it done in time.
Thank you.
Very good. So the R means that it's it's going to be a revision. Okay, next, ordinance number 24-166. Any comments from my colleagues? This has to do with fixing the mayor's salary. Okay, we'll move on to the next one, ordinance number 24-167. This has to do with fixing the salary of members of council. Any comments from my colleagues? Okay, we'll move on to ordinance number 24-168. It's an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Neighborhood Alliance. And yes, Mr. Zuber?
Yeah, we're gonna have a suspension of the rule next week on that.
Thank you. An emergency passage.
Which ordinance?
The very last one, 24-168. Anything else, Mr. Zuber, on that one? Okay, anybody else? Okay, it's now time for public input on any topic. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak?
You'll need to unlock your iPhone first.
I turned it off. I don't know why it's doing that again. Because it's plugged
William Zimmerman. First, I'd like to comment about the budget meeting. I attended it. It was very enlightening. So the public understands that they're talking about $3.7 million that they're over budget from projects that they wanted to use and do last year into this year's as well. I found that to be astounding. I would hope you call your congressperson so that they can, their council person, so that they can have a conversation with you about it. Furthermore, I also asked for $50,000 for the Ohio Citizens for Honesty, Integrity, and Openness in Government. We're registered in the state. We're still looking for money so that we can fight corruption in our city. Second of all, found that enlightening that we raced through all of these ordinances and stuff, and one of them happens to be the mayor's salary. I don't know if you guys are all trying to get out of here. I don't know what the motivation was. It would have taken an extra 2 or 3 minutes. Mayor's salary is going up to $125,000, and I still believe he shouldn't be the safety director of our town. Should have that title taken away, removed. He hasn't acted in the best interest of the public. I recently had a conversation with Mr. Esborn this morning. We talked about a variety of things, so I made some public records requests upon him. I'm trying to understand the Brownfield Committee. Now, I'm sorry I didn't bring that up with me. Brownfield Committee was formed on, or at least it was talked about, Steve Luca proposed that a committee be formed to get brownfield funding back on December 10th of 2021. Now, I've asked for minutes from meetings for the Brownfield Committee. Mr. Esborn told me there are none. This committee exists. It was part of the CIC. And yet I can't find any documentation that says that they've had meetings and talked and gathered. So is this a rogue operation? They do what they want? Only have meetings when they chose in separate places? Because it doesn't sound very transparent to me. I don't understand how all of a sudden this subcommittee who's reporting to the CIC about what we all would believe is a very important event, that's the power plant, was able to go and do whatever they wanted most of the time. Doesn't seem as though they're reporting to anybody. Mr. Arnold's committee, he was a representative for the CIC. I'm astounded that nobody has any records. This goes back to the same situation with the Lake Road speed limit. Mr. Zilka told me, Bill, that's not the way we did business. It's not the way we did things. Well, is this other ways that we're not doing things? Because this was under his administration. Speed limit also miraculously was 25, when I've shown the documentation from ODOT says it should be 35. I don't understand these things. And so because it was started or asked to by Mr. Luca to start it to look for funding, we got $300,000. That money's now with the water company. So I don't understand these. Doesn't make sense to me. Furthermore, I would at this point ask Mr. Arnold for copies of meetings and minutes for the Avon Lake Community Improvement Corporation, CIC, and the Brownfield Committee minutes as well. So I'm making a written and oral request. At some point, somebody has to say something about these kinds of misgivings that are done in our town. And I don't understand how they just continue, and we continue to find more and more. Mr. Arnold, this is for you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else want to come to the podium?
Gerald W. Phillips, 461 Windward Way. Mr. Zimmerman always mentions the word corruption. And let's go down memory lane. We had Mayor Hasserad convicted of corruption. We had Mayor Urban convicted of corruption. We had Bucky Koff, the convicted felon who always gets his development convicted of corruption. So to say and to ignore it, you know, we have a history of corruption in the city of Avon Lake. Mr. Zimmerman came before the board and asked for funding for a citizens group. Well, that citizens group's been in existence since 2001. It's been active in many communities in Northeast Ohio. Its purpose is to educate the public, to get involved in their government through public records, sunshine law, petition drives. You know, it serves a purpose. But I want to talk about the CIC. We have an ordinance, 22-106, adopted on July 21st, 2022, supposedly setting up the ordinance, setting up this CIC. But if you go to the website and you look on the Secretary of State, you'll see that somehow this organization has a history going back to 2003. In fact, it's amazing that, you know, we have a member on council, Mr. Smith, who was actively involved in the setup of the organization, and he was one of the original trustees of that entity with Mr. Berner and Mr. Nguyen. Now, unfortunately, that entity, you know, lost its charter. And then we had a subsequent history, which I brought up to Mr. Ebert in a previous meeting, you know, about the second Avon Lake Community Improvement Corporation, which was formed by our so-called lawyer, Ted Esborn, who decided to amend the articles and take it upon himself without the knowledge of the law director. So we have a history. In 2013, one of our former law director, Abe Lieberman, okay, had to reinstate it because that entity was canceled. So we do have a lot of problems about that entity that is clearly non-transparent. That entity, you know, is a public office, subject to the Sunshine Law, subject to the Public Records Law, and you can look at ORC 1172411, which indicates that it is a public office. It should be keeping public. It should have public records, and it should have meeting minutes, and yet they don't have any. They don't have any public records. I asked for it. I have an organizational chart which shows who the members are, which I got as part of a public records request. It's, as Mr. Zimmerman said, it was formed by a 6-0 vote on December 10th, 2021. Actual motion was approved. So we have a Brownfield committee. Steve Luca is the chairman. Todd Davis is a member as outside counsel. Dan Bucci, who used to be on council, I believe, or in office. Andrew Perry, who's been involved with city activities. Jeff Browse. I mean, I've sat here for about 2 months, and I've heard all these people come forward from this so-called Brownfield committee who act as expert and keep saying that there's this so-called overwhelming support by the public concerning, making that a park. But yet, we don't have any meeting minutes. We don't even have anything indicating what that meeting was, other than 2 so-called meetings, a power plant vision workshop on October 19th, 2021. I have a sign-in sheet, same names. They even got pictures of this so-called visionary meeting, okay? No public in there, no public there. And the other meeting deals with the Gensler, which they have the records. So we don't have any documents of a survey, but yet we have people from the public giving false statements before this board. Anybody wants copies, I'm more than willing to supply.
Can I get a copy?
Mr. Phillips, if you can give Valerie Rossmarin what you have, she will distribute it to the other council members. That way everyone has the
Will you
same.
read it?
Yes, sir.
I write memos and nobody reads them.
Thank you for coming forward. Anybody else from the audience on any topic? Seeing none, then we will adjourn. Thank you for coming in this evening.